This is part 4 of the series of videos on the racial origin of Indians and explains how various tribes were forced to disperse from in and around Babylon to form various nations of the world. Hello friends, this is Unmasked Truth with Harmanjeet Saini, where I provide unique analysis of world events based on the unmasked truth that after surrender, Germany continued World War II clandestinely and became a killing machine. I also provide true news that you will find nowhere else. Now, Semiramis spent approximately 98 years of her life in Babylon, 29 of which overlapped her stay in Assyria, 110 years in Egypt, and 42 years as ruler over Assyria, with 29 years overlapping her stay in Babylon. She taught her Babylonian mystery religion to all the priests in Egypt, Babylon, and Assyria. She was in an ideal position to do so because the world population was still quite small and most of the people had not moved away from near Babylon. Around 2038 BCE, Semiramis permanently left Egypt and came to Babylon. She seems to have been called from Egypt by the Medes and other descendants of Japheth settled in and around Babylon. The reason seems to have been that 17 years earlier in 2055 BCE, Ashur had begun conquest in the Middle East with son Ninus II as the general of his forces. Here is what Diodorus mentions about Ninus II's brutality and cruel practices in Book 2, Chapter 1, page 100 of his historical library. He writes, Ninus, therefore, the Assyrian king, with the prince of Arabia, his assistant, with a numerous army. The army may have been numerous for those early times, but perhaps no more than a few thousand strong. Uh, uh, Invaded the Babylonians, then next bordering upon him. For the Babylon that is now was not built at that time, but the province of Babylon had in it then many other considerable cities, whose inhabitants he easily subdued, being rude and unexpert in matters of war, and imposed upon them a yearly tribute, but carried away the king with all his children prisoners, and soon after put them to death. Being thus strengthened, he invaded Media, whose king Farnus, coming out against him with a mighty army, again mighty for those times, but perhaps no more than tens of thousands strong, he was utterly routed and lost most of his men, and was taken prisoner with his wife and 7 children, and after crucified. That is the cruelty with which Ninus II treated kings. He crucified them. Remember, such conquests and war and brutal treatment of kings were first in the post flood world. Ninus II must have become one of the most hated men. While the conquests were going on, Nineveh, the capital of the now uh, building Assyrian Empire, was being fortified with very high, thick walls with massive gates so that the Assyrians felt their capital was impregnable. After conquering many lands in 17 years, Ninus II just dwelt in fortified Nineveh and forced all those he had subjugated to serve him and bring him tribute annually. He appointed others as rulers over peoples whose kings and their children he brutally murdered. He could call on his appointed rulers for additional support as he needed in soldiers and revenues to fight and subdue other rulers. There can be no doubt that many of the rulers and generals of the armies of the lands the Assyrian had subjugated, after cruelly killing their former patriarch kings, would be engaged in intrigues to have Ninus II murdered. But he was impregnable in fortified Nineveh. It was virtually impossible for armies to attack and conquer the city and bring Ninus II to justice. Intrigue was the only alternative. The rulers of the Japhethites in and around Babylon must have had revenge in mind when they called Semiramis from Egypt. Remember, Semiramis was a descendant of Japheth herself, hence their kin. Semiramis continued to live in Babylon and propagated a Babylonian mystery religion from there. Since the destruction of the tower, not a single ruling dynasty originated in Babylon city precincts for 1,000 years. But Semiramis made it the headquarters of her religion and started building the city of Babylon into a magnificent city at this time. By this time, the population of the whole world had barely crossed the 1 million mark. Though Noah had sent colonists along the Mediterranean coast, most of the rebels' families were still living close to Babylon, from where they had earlier separated according to languages after the departure of Nimrod for Egypt. They had started migrating outwards from Babylon. The family patriarchs had become petty kings over their descendants. The Bible provides the amazing answer as to how Semiramis used these kings at this time to spread her mystery religion. Semiramis, the mother and later wife of Nimrod, was the original fallen woman described in the Bible in Revelation 17 verses 1 to 5, which state, "Come," this is the angel speaking to John the Apostle, "Come, I will show unto you the judgment of the great whore that sits upon many waters." Many waters are symbol for nations. Uh, Come, I will show unto you the judgment of the great whore that sits upon many waters, with whom kings of the earth have committed fornication, literally committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. Fornication here is a pagan religion, which is described as spiritual fornication. And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color, the color of royalty, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand, full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. And upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. So Semiramis's character regarding fornication had already become well known. Now back in Babylon from Egypt, Semiramis was free from the shackles of her marriage to Cush first, then her own son Nimrod. This is the time when her unbridled lust came to the fore, and she founded the pagan temple priestess prostitute system. She continued committing fornication with all the kings that were nearby. The holdover of this temple prostitute system is the Devdasi system in South India. In Babylon, she committed fornication with the kings of the various family groups settled nearby. They had not moved too far away from Babylon yet. She, as the head of her counterfeit Babylonian mystery system, gave herself sexually to these kings and other civil rulers of the earth of her time, and foisted her system onto the tribal groups of her day, who in turn propagated it to their populations. The tribes then grew into great nations. As the nations migrated outward from Babylon, the central point, they carried the counterfeit religion of Semiramis with them to all areas of the earth. While Semiramis was committing fornication with the kings of the earth and spreading her Babylonian mystery religion and building up the city of Babylon, the Japhethite kings and commanders had not forgotten to bring Ninus II to justice. They continued to plot with Semiramis on how to bring him down by intrigue, since it was impossible to bring him down by attacking impregnable Nineveh, his capital city. About a century earlier, Semiramis had a relationship with Ninus II when she had fled from Egypt on Nimrod's death. Her illegitimate son Horus was born of that relationship. While in Babylon, she had been meeting Ninus II, spreading her mystery religion. Now she renewed her relationship with him, who became very fond of her again. After close to 30 years of her being in Babylon, he apparently married her this time. Then she probably played a prank on him to ask him to give her his royal authority for 5 days. She held a sumptuous banquet for the army commanders and the nobility who obeyed all her commands, so that all her subjects could observe that she ruled. She then secretly committed Ninus II to jail. Only the conspirators knew about her whereabouts. Then she carried out the plans that Ninus II had made for invading and conquering Armenia. She was successful in this endeavor. After the victory in Armenia, she had Ninus II assassinated and ruled in his place. The year was 2003 BCE. It had taken 35 years of intrigue by Semiramis and the Japhethites and other rulers and generals whose peoples Ninus II had conquered to bring him down. As soon as Horus, the son of Semiramis and Ninus II, learned that his father had been assassinated in a plot by his mother and that his mother now ruled the Assyrian Empire, he left Europe in 2003 BCE, leaving his son as ruler, and came to Assyria. Semiramis then allied herself with the king of Armenia. A three-way struggle ensued between Semiramis, Horus, and the king of Armenia to control the Assyrian Empire. Finally, in a battle in 1961 BCE, Horus defeated the combined forces of his mother Semiramis and the king of Armenia, in which both were killed, and Horus became ruler of Assyria, which he ruled till his death in 1923 BCE. It is very important to understand the nature of the Assyrian Empire. The world was sparsely populated at that time, and the people essentially lived a pastoral lifestyle. The form of government was mainly patriarchal, based on tribal and clan organization. The population of the clan would have been at best in the tens of thousands. People followed the patriarch or clan leader to whom they owed allegiance. Now imagine the situation that then existed. Clans or tribal groups of perhaps a few thousand individuals or a few tens of thousands at best occupied a certain piece of land, farmed it, and raised domestic animals. First, it was easy for Nimrod to build an empire. With a small army of a few hundred men, he could go to any clan and force their leaders to submit and pay him tribute. Nobody would dare oppose a powerful giant and a few hundred very powerful men who accompanied him. An army of a few hundred men was considered a good sized army many years later, even in the days of Abraham. Genesis 14, verse 14 says, Abraham maintained an army of 319 trained servants born in his own house, who went with him to the war with the three Assyrian kings and one Persian king to rescue his nephew Lot. So after Nimrod's death, Asher's son Ninus II was able to do the same thing very much. With an army of thousands, he could terrorize vast areas consisting of many clans of men, women, and children, the largest of which would be no more than a few 10,000 strong. They would be forced to pay him tribute by bringing it to his capital Nineveh annually. Those who failed to do so were attacked, robbed of all their wealth, and even destroyed. The Bible provides an excellent example of this system in Genesis 14 verses 1 to 5. And it came to pass in the days of Amraphel, an Assyrian, and the son of Horus, king of Shinar, Arioch, another son of Horus, king of Elasar, Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, who were the Persians, and Tidal, another another Assyrian king, who was a king over many nations, that they made war with Bera, king of Sodom, and Birsha, king of Gomorrah, Shinab, king of Admah, and Shemeber, king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, that is Zoar. All these joined together in the valley of Siddim, that is the Sword Sea. 12 years they served Chedorlaomer, and in the 13th year they rebelled. In the 14th year, Chedorlaomer and the kings that were with him came and attacked. In this example, all these people had been put to yearly tribute by the Assyrians and Persians. They had paid tribute for 12 years, but in the 13th year they did not bring the tribute. So the Assyrians and Persians attacked and plundered them. At that time, this was the most efficient system for controlling or running a vast empire. The Assyrians were insatiable in their demands. If the Assyrians saw any of their subjects prospering, despite the tribute imposed on them, they would simply demand larger annual tribute. In the North Indian languages, there are many words derived from the word Deutsch, the name Germans use for themselves, such as Dushman, which means deadly enemy, Dushmani, which means enmity, usually long lasting, Dosh, which means accuse, also use the sense of falsely accused. Doshi, which means guilty. Dusht, which means the meanest individual who wants to take away even what you need for your barest survival. Dant or Dantya, which means demonic individual. All these words have come into the vocabulary of North Indian languages because some time ago their ancestors were subject to the Assyrians who called themselves Deutsch. And these are the words that fitly describe them based on their dealings with subject peoples. But how could people avoid the bitter tyranny and oppression of the Assyrians? The only way they could do so was to move away from the territory of the ruler. They had to move away with their clan to other vast areas of the earth that were still virgin territory. What people refused to do voluntarily under Noah's authority, that is, spread out in colonies, which would have been a great deal easier and peacefully, now were forced to do of their own accord to get away from Assyrian despots. They had to do so in terrible fear and continue to live in terror of being caught, tortured, and killed by the oppressor for not having brought their annual tribute. But the end result was that they did spread out over the earth in clans exactly as God intended and ultimately settled in areas God had allotted to them. Josephus records in his Antiquities of the Jews, chapter in Book 1, chapter 4, section 1. After this, that is the confusion of languages, they were dispersed abroad on account of their languages and went by colonies everywhere. And each colony took possession of that land which they light upon and unto which God led them. As quoted earlier, Genesis 10, which provides a table of nations for the descendants of Japheth, Ham, and Shem, the Bible states, from these, that is, the descendants of Japheth, the coastland peoples of the Gentiles were separated into their lands, every one according to his language, according to their families, into their nations. So these are the sons of Ham, according to their families, according to their languages, and their lands, and in their nations. And in verse 31, these were the sons of Shem, according to their families, according to their languages, in their lands, according to their nations. Yes, God guided even the dispersal of various peoples from Babylon due to Assyrian oppression. Those are the racial origins of various nations. In part 5, I will discuss the racial origins of people in the Indian subcontinent. Thank you very much for watching this video. Please continue to watch my videos and read my articles on important world events, World War III watch, politics, international business, advice on health and medical problems, and much more for in-depth and insightful analysis. Please also subscribe to my YouTube channel by searching on YouTube for Unmasked Truth with Harmanjeet Sani for information on the latest videos.